Okay, let's get going. Well, hello and welcome to the National Adaptation Forum webinar for the Virtual Climate Displacement Forum hosted by EcoAdapt. I'm Molly Johnson. I'm one of the forum organizers and your organizer for today's webinar focused on community-wide protection, relocation, and expansion. For those of you returning to the series, welcome back. And for those who are just joining us, we'd like to go through some housekeeping rules just to ensure we have a successful webinar. So please, to help us reduce feedback, place your telephone, cell phone, or computer on mute, even if you are using the microphone voice over IP option. Please use the question function in your control panel to submit questions to the presenters throughout the webinar. Please also use the question function to report any technical issues you might be encountering. We will be recording and posting this webinar on the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange website for future viewing. So the webinar should be available online next Monday, and it'll be available on cakex.org. If you look in your handouts tab, you'll be able to see the slides and the presenter information for today's presentation, as well as the Napakiak Managed Retreat Plan that Walter is sharing with us. And finally, throughout this series, we'll be compiling recommended resources on climate displacement for attendees and the larger adaptation community. So you can make suggestions to the resource page that will be shared with you in the link via the chat box by my colleague Alex. So I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenters. So with us we have Taholah Thurman, who's local coordinator for the city of Shishmaref. We also have Kelsey Oldenke, who's the senior planner for the Quinault Indian Nation. We have Sophia Kachatag, who's the program manager and grant manager for the native village of Shaktoolik. We have Walter Nelson, who's the Managed Retreat Coordinator and City Council member for the city of Napakiak. And we have Alessandra Jerolleman, who's the Assistant Professor at Jacksonville State University and Community Resilience Specialist at the Lowlander Center. So you can learn more, again, about each presenter by downloading their presenter information PDF in the Handouts tab. We would also quickly like to acknowledge that there are many people across the U.S. and Native communities experiencing immediate threats to their lives and livelihoods due to climate change impacts. This series is intended to provide a holistic view on climate displacement, but cannot be representative of all the people and communities facing or working on this issue. So we encourage you to share about your work or your community here today via the question function, as well as on our virtual networking platforms. And we also thank you for attending today despite all of the challenges and uncertainty due to the ongoing pandemic. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Alessandra to give us a quick introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone, or morning for some folks. As Molly mentioned, today's panel focuses on community-led and community-wide protection, relocation, and expansion. The panelists represent tribal communities that are on the front lines of locally led efforts at addressing adaptation challenges. I would like to spend just a few moments framing some of the challenges and limitations in attempting to do community-led resettlement and site expansion efforts, and then let you spend the bulk of the time listening to the real experts, those who are more directly dealing with these challenges in their communities and on the ground. The first thing I just want to raise is the overarching considerations and concerns thinking about this through the lens of justice. There are some very real questions in terms of who pays, not just financially, but also who bears the burden of adaptation. Communities are bearing these burdens and incurring costs when the increasing vulnerability and risk that is driving the consideration of relocation was created and imposed by a long history of policies that reduce adaptive capacity, mobility, and resilience, and we can't step away from that context. Another important justice consideration is the concerns that are raised when relocation becomes framed as the only option across the board when communities are all in very different situations. And second, I just want to bring up two broad categories of challenges. The first has to do with allowing the participation of all who are interested. That might mean not demanding 100% immediate agreement before proceeding, as some funding sources do, or including those who have already been displaced across time, for example, along the Gulf Coast, folks who have had to leave their communities because of a history of hurricanes, but would like to be part of the community moving forward and are part of the community, even if they're not geographically present. It also means thinking through the inclusion of those who may not own property or may have property with contested or convoluted ownership, may have multiple generations in one home, etc., as well as those properties and communities where the benefit cost requirements are not readily met or cannot be met across the board. And all of this while respecting sovereignty of the tribal communities, including those that are not federally recognized. And the second broad category of challenges is the convoluted and complex funding and policy environment with so many different mechanisms that all have different timelines, different requirements, different matches, regulations, priorities, and so on, all of which put communities in the place of having to navigate sometimes conflicting guidelines and sometimes having to make a lot of trade-offs without full knowledge and understanding of what the range of options might be. It can mean that timing is off in terms of when certain things can be done, infrastructure and housing, for example. And it also has a lot to do with whether or not the community can retain control or access to the existing site. And finally, without just one agency, one program, one overarching mechanism, it means a huge burden of time in navigating all of these complex relationships. With that little bit of framing, I'd like to turn it over to our first presenter, Walter.
Hey, Walter, are you with us? So I guess at this point, I think it's a good time to just tell attendees that a few of our presenters are joining from really rural areas, and that brings up some challenges for technical issues. So Walter, if your sound comes back and you're able to join us, just let us know. How about Twyla? Twyla, how are things going on your end?
Hi, this is Twyla. I'm doing good. I think you can hear
You're
me
ready
okay,
to go.
right?
Yeah, I hear you great. All right, we'll jump to your presentation and we'll skip around. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to do a little talking spiel before I go over the slides. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for the invitation to present at this displacement webinar. I hope to learn about all the different pathways that our communities are taking to protect and preserve their lands. My English name is Twyla Thurmond, and my Inupiaq name is Anorak, after my late grandmother. I'm half Inupiaq Eskimo and half Norwegian. I spent the majority of my early childhood living in Shishmaref and moved to Anchorage, Alaska, which is a larger city, throughout my early teen and young adulthood. Although the move was quite a culture shock, spending time living in a larger city gave me alternative perspectives. Those perspectives allow me to compare and contrast different abilities to grasp what is made available to larger populated areas versus what is offered to smaller rural communities like Shishmaref. I grew up living a subsistence lifestyle. People in my family and community work throughout the year to preserve our lifestyle and culture. We gather berries and greens. We hunt game and fish seasonally. We Eskimo dance and participate in a wide array of cultural-based activities. Shishmaref is located on a narrow spit of fine silt-like sand, which is about 3 miles long and a 1/4 mile wide. We do not have any trees or hardscape material available to help with our ongoing erosion protection and expansion projects. So it's difficult when we're trying to transport materials by barge at extreme costs. It's also difficult to match funding for federally funded projects that we are awarded. This subdues the forward movement of some and has even halted others altogether. We have dealt with the impacts of erosion since the 1970s, and I have many predecessors that have dealt with these same impacts and barriers multi-generationally. Although there is now a formal position for dealing with the logistic aspect of facilitating projects, the same issue still presents. We need clearer direction and ability to get projects moving at a faster pace. So, like it was mentioned, I'm the local coordinator, and instead of the city of Shishmaref, I work for the native village of Shishmaref, but I serve the whole community. My position is basically a point of contact for our expansion prep, planning, as well as protecting what infrastructure we have left. I feel honored and blessed to have this opportunity to advocate, provide a voice, and educate people on what impacts we as a community face here in Shishmaref. The warming temperature changes that we all know are of a global concern affects our community in particular by way of unusually strong storms out of the general storming season. The storms cause violent tides and tsunami-like swells, as well as flooding. These threats that root from our environment have increasingly heightened fear and worry for our people. Due to the loss of shoreline ice pack, we are hunting and gathering earlier than ever before. The thawing of permafrost, rise in sea level, and a delay in the freeze up of our Bering Sea causes thinner ice and creates problems when our community patrons go hunting or travel by ice. It forces residents to become more dependent on highly processed Western foods that are shipped in at a huge cost, roughly 2 to 4 times the cost you might find at your local grocery store. Engineers have estimated that as a result of erosion, the community village site may be lost to the sea in about 15 years. Although that time frame is just a speculation for now, the perspective in that should speak volumes. Shishmaref and its community members have worked hard trying to continue on with their daily lives, but the fears of our island eroding are still prevalent. We hope for faster turnaround for grants and funds that we apply for. We hope for alterations and changes in policy better suited to help our community more swiftly. And we hope to have our lands and people protected before we don't have another choice, before we are forced to move, before we are forced to separate from our people and our culture. With that, I do have a few slides here. The one showing on your screen is basically depicting our location here. Shishmaref is a village located on Shereshef Island in the Chukchi Sea, just north of the Bering Strait and 5 miles from the mainland. It lies within the Bering Land Bridge National Preserve. The population was 562 persons at the 2000 census. It's between 600 and 700 now. Next slide, please. Next slide. And this is just showing what types of subsistence gathering that we do. We rely on subsistence seasonal hunting and gathering throughout the year. There's some salmon berries, blueberries, blackberries, cranberries, and various roots and greens that we hunt during the summer, or that we gather during the summer seasons. Next slide. Next slide, please.
There's a little lag.
This is some of the
should show up. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, okay. We hunt for reindeer, caribou, seal, walrus, muskox, fish, moose, This is some of the game and meat that we hunt throughout the year. Next slide. And this was a photo taken in 2006 when our storming season began, pulling away so much infrastructure, and our homes sometimes get lost to the sea if we don't have enough time or funds to move homes. The largest danger that we're currently facing now, along with many other rural communities in Alaska, is erosion and flooding. We fear the loss of our homes and our land, both cultural and industrial structures, access to our sanitation, road, and damage and breach of our water sources are of paramount concern. Next slide. Historically, we've sought out help through federal and state agencies and scientists in efforts to attain funds for protection, mitigate potential hazards, and prepare for expansion to the mainland, and protection of what infrastructure remains for the future of our people and preservation of our culture. Our focus and efforts are to create clearer pathways for competitive funds. Numerous measures to protect Shishmaref and fortify the coastline have been completed and passed. Some of these include installation of gabion baskets, riprap, seawall, pesco baskets, sandbag revetment, and rock revetment. Including invested monies used to repair and relocate buildings that were subjected to imminent danger and or flooding. The total equates to approximately the USAC reported that over the next 50 years, the coast erosion would cost anywhere between 47 million and 130 million. Next slide, please. Critical infrastructure identified by Shishmaref residents who participated in a survey several years back. When asked about measures needed to protect the community in place, 73% of participants agreed that the seawall was necessary to keep us in Shishmaref as long as we can be home. In addition, participants mentioned that it's necessary to build a seawall around the entire island, while others prioritize the seawall to protect the road to the landfill, airport, meat racks, the cemetery, and homes in low areas. 9% of our participants stressed the need to relocate immediately to escape the third world living conditions in which we live. We don't have running water. We have overcrowded homes and lack of land for building additional homes, and the lack of running and water and sewer, which many people within our community have expressed is very difficult to live with.
Okay, thank you so much, Taholah, for your presentation. I'm going to see next if Walter is back on the line to give his presentation. And Walter, are you there? Okay, well, we're going to move on to Kelsey's presentation next. So thanks, Kelsey.
All right. Hi, I'm Kelsey Moldanke. I'm Senior Planner for the Quinault Indian Nation. Next. We'll just start off with a quick introduction to the nation and orient people. In the state of Washington, we're on the Pacific Outer Coast on the Olympic Peninsula, not far from the Olympic National Park. You can see Quinault Reservation there marked on the left. Taholah is a village of about 800 850 people at the mouth of the Quinault River. We're about 2.5 hours from Seattle and 3 from Portland. Next. Here's just a view of the village. You can see we have many facilities, important facilities in the lower village, the community center, the mercantiles, the one store, senior program, the museum, so the cultural heritage, Head Start and other school programs, and then the K through 12 school are all in the lower village. The area highlighted in yellow is the village relocation area. That's at elevation between 85 and 165 feet in elevation. Next. So Taholah is at threat. There are dual threats to Taholah. Number one is sea level rise. Taholah is very low lying, as you'll see in one of the slides coming up. It's not very high above sea level, so that any additional rise in sea will be very detrimental to the village. It's also subject to tsunami from a 9.0 earthquake. It's caused by the Cascadia subduction zone. The subduction zone lies not far off the coast, and it's similar. It has similar tectonics to the one that caused the 2004 tsunami. The interval for large quake events and tsunamis is 300 to 500 years, and we're 320 years into that cycle. Residents would have 5 to 20 minutes of escape time. We run drills every year to get people, to remind people to get up the hill. Not everybody makes it in 20 minutes, and we run those during nice days. It's likely that it'll happen at night on a bad weather day. The ground will shake. The entire village will sink 4 to 6 feet, according to geologists. It's built on fill, and there's a high water table, so there may be water shooting up, so the roads are probably shot, so people will not be able to drive out. So there's a very high likelihood that the lower village, that not everybody in the lower village will survive. And even if they did, they'll have lost all their possessions, and we'll have 600 homeless people for months. So therefore, because of that, the threat from sea level rise and the tsunami, the Quinault took upon themselves to decide that a move to higher ground is necessary. Next. So there are various resources threatened by climate change. As you can see here, this is standing on the seawall during a very minor storm. That some of the homes there on First Avenue are very close to the water, and it's not very high compared to the water, so that any sea level rise would be detrimental. The clams are at risk from ocean acidification. Salmon are already suffering from warm waters in the ocean and lower river flows. The lower river flows increase temperature in the river. The salmon like the cold water to come up. And the reason that we have lower river flows than in the past is that the glacier at the head of the headwaters of the river in Olympic National Park has basically disappeared. So we don't have snow melting or ice melting feeding the river throughout the summer. The reservation is forest land, and so climate change may increase fire danger and the incidence of forest pests. So clams, salmon, and trees are all economic drivers for the Quinault Nation. And so if there are any adverse effects to these resources, the tribal members will be adversely affected economically. And clams and salmon have great cultural importance. So if these resources go away, there will be a great loss to Quinault culture. And then most importantly, the most important resource is the Quinault people at risk. Next. Here you can see Anderson Glacier at the headwaters of the river, and you can see the recession of the glacier over the past 100 years to a point where it doesn't even exist now. Next. This is just a view projection by the Washington State Department of Natural Resources of the flood that would be caused by the tsunami. As you can see, it takes out the entire lower village And there are many programs, as mentioned before, including seniors, Head Start, and the Taholah School in the lower village. Next. The pink area is the lower village. That's 40 to 50 feet of depth of tsunami inundation. The highest building in Taholah is about 20 feet. So there's not going to be any place to escape in the lower village. People will have to go up the hill. As you can see, the relocation area is basically adjacent to the existing village. So we are lucky in that, unlike some of our folks down in Louisiana who would face moving miles and miles and miles away from their original settling area. So given they were faced with these threats, the nation undertook the Taholah Village Relocation Master Plan, and that's when I came aboard. Next. As part of the master plan, we of course we seeked community input. This was done in the form of community dinners, online surveys. We went door to door with surveys. Really, I think the best way to get information from people was just to talk to them. Thankfully, the folks who worked on the plan were all nation employees, so we were around to be able to talk to people. We weren't just consultants flying in from Seattle or Portland. Next. Most of what the community focused on was family, elders, trust, keeping kids safe, helping each other, everybody matters or nobody matters. Next. They wanted a place where children are safe, where culture is preserved. They wanted pedestrian friendly, but auto accessible. We couldn't just take a model from Seattle or Portland and bring it in. This is a rural area. It's 40, 50 miles to the nearest Walmart and Safeway, so people will be driving. We get a lot of rain, so people aren't always out looking to walk. Organic farm, and again, connection to heritage and nature. Next. So about 175 homes and 650 people in Lower Village. There is a long waiting list for housing, both ownership and rental with the Housing Authority. So we look to take advantage of this building opportunity, not only for the folks relocating, but also to have a place for people to move back to the reservation. About 175,000 square feet of community facilities need to be moved and or expanded in the Upper Village. And there's an 80,000 square foot school, which is controlled by the school district, which is a state agency. So the nation doesn't technically control the school. Next. In terms of integration of culture, the master plan incorporated traditionally used plants like Indian tea and camas, as you see there, in landscape and wetland areas. We worked with well-known artist, Quinault artist Marvin Oliver, and some of our other Quinault artists to integrate art into the new building. The Generations building that you see there in the middle is our first building. It's senior program and early childhood education. Those were the people identified as most vulnerable back in 2007. So the building for them was chosen by the people, by the General Council, to be the first one to be relocated. And we used this opportunity working with Mr. Oliver to get some of the artists to work in mediums that they had not worked with before and to meet fabricators. They hadn't worked in metal before, as you can see there on the right. Metal totem poles and other Coast Salish art in metal, and then incorporated, in this case, on the front pillars of the building. And by doing so, we were trying to increase their marketability and make it an economic development opportunity for some of the younger artists. Next. And again, here you can see more of the art, the signs, the language integration. And next. Just briefly, here is the concept for the village. It's centered around the school. Because again, family and children are very important, so the school is kind of the hub for the envisioned village. Next. We worked with Washington State University Extension on the quote-unquote Quinault House. This isn't a specific house design, but this is an energy efficient and climate appropriate design suggestion for people when they build homes and for the nation when it develops community buildings. We get 90 inches of rain. There's a lot of salt air being so close to the ocean and a lot of wind. So therefore, climate appropriate buildings and building integrity, construction integrity is of utmost importance. Next. There's one paved road, State Route 109, that connects Taholah with the rest of the world. In most cases, I suppose this would be pretty isolated, but compared to the other folks on this webcast, I guess we're actually pretty connected. But along that one highway is the one power line that serves the village. And both the highway and the power line go through the tsunami zone for several miles. And it's also in an area where we get a lot of landslide. So there's a high probability that the nation would be without, or that Taholah would be without power for months, 6 months, a year, 2 years. And so the folks there are going to have to safely shelter in place for months. So we looked at both biomass and solar as solutions. As mentioned, the nation is covered in timberlands, and timber is a big industry, so there's a lot of slash left over. So the idea would be to use that slash in a biomass facility to produce heat and hot water to heat various community buildings. We were able to find a model that worked with the wet wood in Burns, Oregon, and we've developed plans, engineered plans and architecture plans for that building. We're still seeking funding on the biomass facility. The other thing we looked at was solar. We have completed plans for a 100 kilowatt solar array to accompany the generations building to work with the generator and provide backup power, refrigeration, lights, as that's one of our emergency facilities, or will be in the future when it's done in December. And then ultimately, we would like to do a microgrid with based on a 1 megawatt solar array that can be islanded from the rest of the Grace Harbor Public Utility District grid in the case of emergency, so that there's some power in the community buildings, so the school, the generations building, the clinic, the admin building, the essential services, so that they can keep going during an emergency. Next.
Hey, Kelsey, I just want to make you mindful of the time.
Okay.
Thanks.
We wanted to make sure all economic strata were taken care of. This is just a homeless housing concept that we looked at. Next. How do we fund this? It's going to be funded by the Quinaults and then heavily reliant on federal programs, USDA, federal highways, FEMA, HUD with their ICDBG grants, Indian Health Services, BIA. We've talked to the State Department of Commerce, private funding, community investment tax credits. We use new market tax credits to help fund part of the generations building, and low-income housing tax credits will undoubtedly be used by the Housing Authority for housing down the road. And then there's always the option of getting bank loans. Next. Barriers to funding. There's a lack of capital project funders. Most grants are for planning, not construction. A lot of the focuses on resilience have been in larger communities, larger than 50,000. There's no community between Cape Flattery and the Golden Gate that's larger than 50,000. So I think the coast may be left out of some of these efforts. Or it's for places that have already had disasters and have obvious needs, whereas this is more preparatory for future disasters. So it makes it a little harder to get money for the project. This is a costly project with many aspects. There's no centralized system with the federal government for funding these projects. The General Accounting Office has suggested either FEMA or HUD take the lead on this kind of holistic project, but that has not happened yet. There may be strings attached with various funding sources. HUD with affordable housing. We're trying to do a mixed neighborhood. FEMA has the you have to abandon the land strings. So every agency has different goals that may not exactly fit what we're trying to do. a lack of data to match grant goals. For instance, working on Department of Transportation grants, they look for accident data and how to speed up freight, not necessarily how to build neighborhoods. We could probably save as many lives as a new interchange might, but we don't have accident data or any data to put in benefit cost analysis to sell the project. Off reservation, people look at reinsurance and bonds, and in our case, they're not really options. Thanks. Next. Partners, federal agencies have been helpful. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Fest A team came out and ran a simulation with us for free. The Bonneville Environmental Foundation has provided advice and some money for solar studies. We met with people from the South Pacific, Louisiana, and Alaska at a conference put together by the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, and that was informative and got to kind of make it a worldwide effort. And we worked with the Isle de Jean Charles tribe in Louisiana as they try and move. Next. How do we take advantage of this? As I mentioned, there's a lot of timber on the reservation, and then underlying the reservation is a lot of gravel. And these are both materials that are used in construction. So we have to figure out the best way to source locally and keep money within the reservation as opposed to sending it out off reservation. Next. Where do we go next? Grant writing and fundraising. We need strategies to help people to relocate. One of the big conundrums is if people already have mortgages and have paid off or in the middle of paying off their mortgage, how do we entice people to move up the hill? There are no real instruments out there for that, and we haven't really found any solutions for that. More architecture and engineering plans and build. We've got one building down, and we've got miles of road and many houses, many community buildings to go. Once we have a place for people to move, we can put a moratorium in the lower village so people don't move there into danger. But until then, people need a place to live. So politically, it's difficult to even think about putting a moratorium there. And then there's just more paperwork at the federal level with NEPA. Do we need to hire new staff? What other energy projects can we look at? And then the other village of Queech, the smaller village, also is in tsunami danger. So how do we relocate that village? Next. So Siokul, thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. And I think we have Sophia on the line now, so I'm gonna pass it over to her if she's available.
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you great. Thanks, Sophia. Here we go. All right, go for it. Yes, we're ready.
Okay, hi, my name is Sophia Ketchatag. I am the community coordinator for Shaktoolik, Alaska. Next slide, please.
Okay.
And this is where I'm from. At the top picture, you can see an aerial view of Shaktoolik. This was, I believe, early winter. As you can see, we are surrounded in water. We have the ocean on the south side and the river on the north. Next, please.
Okay.
And here we have a couple of pictures. This is from the storm we had last August, 2019, and we had a berm built in 2014, and last year was when the storm finally eroded what we had on our berm, or at least half of it. But the top picture, you could see the day before of the storm and the day after, how much it eroded. And at the bottom, you can see on the picture to the right, you can see the tundra, and the picture to the left, all you can see is water, and that's pretty much all up in that tundra. And that was the day after the storm. But they have been getting, the storms have been getting worse each year, it seems. Hopefully this year we'll be lucky and don't flood. But you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
On this slide, it's just I just took some pictures to show everyone. The first one is this is past our old site, which is a couple of miles south from our village. You can see that it eroded, and up there you can see our road. And just a few feet from the road is the river, so you can see that it's narrowing. And the second picture is below my mom's house. Usually it's further down. And on the third picture is a picture towards the river. It is going north of our community towards the cannery we have. You can see the cannery building on the last picture, but that was surrounded in water, and this was from last year's storm also. And the third picture is of the road to the cannery, so we couldn't even get there. But after the storm, the Valley Commission allocated funds for our community to repair what was lost. And it took about a month and a half before they had to close the project down. And you can go to the next one.
Okay.
Right now we are on the Storm Surge Berm and Restoration. We got awarded $1 million through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to restore the berm in front of our community. With this grant, we also purchased 2 dump trucks and 1 water truck, which was a serious need for our community. And pictured you see at the top is the berm in progress, and the bottom is the crew for our project. And they're just wrapping it up right now because we are near freeze up. And you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
In February of 2019, we did a survey for our community, and out of 65 surveys handed out, 40 of them were returned. And 30 of the 40 people stated they would move with the community if they did decide to relocate. And having a safety access road with an evacuation center was the community's highest priority. And next slide. I just wanted to show you our subsistence lifestyle. We rely on our subsistence foods here in Shaktoolik, and pictured are just some of the foods that we eat and get from our area. And our area is just got all the subsistence that we need. Fish, berries, wild birds, moose, caribou, seal, ugruk, beluga, berries. And you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So we had gotten a grant through FEMA assistance to get an environmental assessment done for our future planning, either to decide whether we stay and defend or to relocate. It will be up to our prior council, which includes 4 members from the Shaktoolik Native Corporation, 4 members from the City of Shaktoolik, and 4 members from the Native Village of Shaktoolik. They meet either monthly or quarterly to plan and approve projects for our community. I just distributed the draft Golder study to the Tri-Org and the community. So right now they're just reviewing it, and we will be meeting with them sometimes next month to discuss our future, whether we will stay and defend or relocate. But besides that National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant we were awarded, we also were awarded a grant through ICDBG and HUD Imminent Threat Grant to restore the berm in front of Chatulik and the berm past the old site. You can see there's also 2 more grants, one for my wages and 2 for more planning for managed retreat expansion, protect in place, and relocation options. And this is from the DIA Tribal Resilience. But this is all I have. I kind of put this together kind of quickly, so I apologize. I hope I give you guys enough information. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sophia. And thanks for bearing with us at the technical side as well. I'm going to, at this point,
sorry I couldn't be on the webcam. I've been having issues, but thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I know we saw you the other day, but not today. It's okay. At this point, I'm going to see if Walter is on the line. It looks like he is, so let's check in, and if so, I'll pull up his presentation.
Good Emily, Molly, can you hear me?
Yes, Walter, I hear you great, and very happy that you're here.
Okay,
I'm going to pull up your presentation now.
First of all, I want to thank the National Adaptation Forum for inviting me to do a presentation for Napakiak's Managed Retreat program. I also want to thank Max Neal and Emily Clark for ENTCH, who are greatly helping me out from here in my place. First of all, if you can take the first map of Napakiak, if you can see that's the community where I live. If you can see down there at the bottom portion, that's called the Kuskokwim River, and the slough that you see going up around our small village is called Johnson Slough. And the population for Napakiak is right around 350. And we are in a water and sewer house system for all the residents and the businesses in Napakiak. And we live mainly off the land, which provides 50% of our diet that comes from the land. So that's the brief community overview I'm giving for the first. Second.
Yep, it's there.
That's the red spot. That's exactly where the Napakiak is at. We live off the grid, sort of off the grid. We are not in a road system.
Walter, you still there?
Are we on?
I can hear you now. Welcome back.
Okay. If you take the third map, if you can take a picture of the top, there's a couple of folks that are setting their nets under the ice. And that's what most of our community members do. And if you take a look at the bottom picture on the left, that's the Kuskokwim River. And you see Napakiak in the foreground. The whole Kuskokwim is mainly frozen like in November and December, but for since 2016, it hasn't been freezing like it used to freeze. And if you look at the middle picture, there's a couple of boys and a little girl that have picked berries. And if you take a look at the picture on the right, those are called smelt fish that come right after breaking. Next slide. If you could take a look at this picture, it's the history of our erosion response, which was taken from the emergency watershed program taken in 2018. And if you can see the 1952 area, that is where Napakiak used to be, and it's totally all gone. And if you can take a look at the 1980 portion, that's the line where the erosion rate was. And as of today, you can see where our erosion rate is, and we're continuously retreating to the west side of the community. Next slide. If you can take a look at this map was taken in the early 1960s by our local corporation. And all of this land in this 1964 image map now is all gone. And all of the buildings have been moved to the west side of the community. That's an enormous section of land that is completely gone through the erosion. Next map. This photo was taken in the early 1950s, and as you can see, they have a small dozer, a couple of other folks helping out in moving one of the structures, residential buildings, away from the erosion. And this was done in the winter time. Next one. The map you see on the left, a couple of folks standing, that tells you during our westerly windstorms, you can see the waves hitting the bank from the Kuskokwim River. And as you can see, there are two electrical poles standing up, which we woke up to that were almost taken by the erosion. And for the picture on the right, if you see in the foreground, you see a couple of tanks, fuel tanks, and this structure from the erosion was built to slow the erosion down and fenced to keep the children out from the erosion. Next map. This photo was taken August 5 of 2019, and as you can see, the area where it's pointing to the school fuel tank farm. It was 65 feet back then, but with our current measurement that we took out of October 9, it was only 16 feet to where the original site was before the tanks were moved. And as you can see, you can tell how much erosion that it was affected during the fall of August 5. Next map. Again, this photo was taken August 5 of 2019. Back then, the school was exactly at 165 feet to the school. And as of October 9, the new measurement we took, the erosion was at 97 feet to the school building. Next one. This map shows the study was currently done with the river erosion prediction data that was provided by the U.S. Corps of Engineers from shorelines taken from 2010 to 2017. It was provided to the city of Napakiak. And as you can see, their prediction years are underlined. And if you see September 2017, I'm sorry, if you can take a look at the picture, you can see all the structures that are pending to be moved or demolished due to the erosion. And this prediction rate that was completed by the Corps is somewhat pretty close to their prediction. And one thing that they noted for the Napakiak was that they would estimate the cost to be at least $90 million to put up a seawall to protect the community from the erosion. They said they would not likely to do the work due to the depth of the Custom River in front of the village to be in the 50 to 80 foot depth and to the force of the current. Next map. This map is also currently done with, I believe, Goldberg, who did the study for the climate change modeling for Napakiak. As you can see, their predictions in yellow, orange, blue, and red with the years that they predicted of the erosion. That, as you can see, Napakiak, 3/4 of Napakiak would be gone by 2100. Next one. And this map also shows you the high perk prediction rate that they came up with. And as you can see, we're pretty getting close to 2030. And the erosion by then would have taken at least half of the current place where we are living. And by 2050, as you can see with the prediction, our airport would also be expected to be taken by the erosion. And then by the prediction rate by 2070, the whole place of Napakiak would be completely gone to the erosion. But with good news, we are still retreating to the west side of this island where we are living. Next slide. This map shows you the flood depth for Napakiak, like 2050 to 2100. Napakiak, with the prediction, would be all inundated underwater. And as you can see on the top side of these maps, those are higher bluff portions where our only relocation site would be by then. Next map. This just shows you the permafrost assessment done by some of the consulting services that provide us this information after their findings. The study dated last year. On the last slide I showed you, where I mentioned that would be our only relocation site. The study they got done, they mentioned that the area to the north of the current community, where community members have identified a potential relocation site, has visible signs of permafrost in the form of shorter stripes and fluctuation loads. This area likely has a high concentration of ground ice, as evidenced by the fluctuation of lobes and fall lakes, and is not well suited for construction. We cannot recommend relocating village infrastructure into the permafrost area due to permafrost degradation hazard in a warming climate. By then, we would have absolutely no choice but to relocate, even though the site is not very suitable for it. Next slide. These are the current projects that we have completed. We have relocated our city garage and only fire station to the west side of the community. We have since replaced our only boat and hovercraft landing area to the new west side of the community, which provides essential needs for our community members. And we have since downscaled our climate modeling society presented along these two slides. And like I mentioned, geotechnical evaluation of the potential new sites have been identified and are still ongoing. And hopefully our managed retreat planning efforts will continue to keep moving forward. Our next step, next slide. We are currently doing a river change study, and selection site for our managed retreat, continuous retreat to the west side of the community. Also selecting a new site layout. We have since designed roads and have recently completed a new road construction to the new subdivision site. We also are in continuous efforts to build new roads and utilities for our community. And like I mentioned, we are continuously having to move buildings on our own to the west side of the new subdivision. And the last goal, the school district is temporarily be providing facilities and build a new school and in the new subdivision area at the cost of about 36 million. So that is my presentation on our managed retreat plan for Napakiak.
Thank you so much, Walter, for sharing that with us and obviously for your ongoing work. I'm going to pass it to Alessandra. Due to the time, I'm going to have you pick one question for today, and then we'll share other questions with the panelists and get their input in written form and send that out to the audience. So thanks, Alessandra.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to the audience for bearing with us through some of the connectivity challenges. There were a lot of really great questions, both submitted when folks registered for the webinar and also during the webinar. So I'm going to share one of the questions and invite the panelists to respond, and look forward to seeing responses to the other questions at a later point in time. And so the question is, how does displacement affect the rights of displaced Native communities, and in particular, land reservation boundaries and subsistence? And so wondering if any of the panelists have any comments on the impacts of these efforts relative to rights.
Well, in the case of Quinault, I don't think moving the village physically has much of an effect. I think kind of culturally, or to the people who have lived down in the lower village, moving will have an effect. There'll be a mental emotional effect, just because that's where they've always been. And thankfully, Quinault doesn't have to move very far, just up the hill, unlike Louisiana or other places. I know some of the other reservations locally, Quileute and Hoh River, they both did land swaps with the federal government to gain some more land. But in terms of actual rights, I guess the folks most affected might be the folks in Louisiana, the Ile de Jean Charles folks. They're state recognized, not federally recognized, so their rights aren't necessarily as established, and so they've had problems with their relocation effort, even though money was allocated. So I think that's would be the case. They would probably be the most affected.
Thank you. Are there any other of our panelists who would also like to respond to that question?
I think we're at a huge disadvantage. There was another rural community very close to ours in the Bering Sea that had completely been displaced, and the whole community had to move to Nome, Alaska, because it was unsafe to live there. And I have friends in the King Island culture and from that community. And because of the displacement, a lot of the culture was lost. Many people turned to drugs and alcohol because essentially they lost their culture and their home. They've worked really hard to try to reestablish themselves culturally. They've created a dance group, but really their way of life, all their subsistence activities had to be altered. Some were ceased because of the displacement. So I think that's a really good question and something to magnify when we're trying to create policy changes or alterations so that we get help sooner and faster. But it's something that we're all fearful of, that we will lose our homes, our identity, and our culture. So that's what I have to share in relation to the question, I guess.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Sophia or Walter are still connected and have a response. Well, thank you very much to everyone, and thank you to all of our panelists. I believe we only had time for one question, so hopefully folks are happy with the one I selected.
Yeah, thanks, Alessandra, and thanks again to all our panelists for sharing their situation and what they're doing about it. You know, obviously, we're here to support you, and hopefully we can make some improvements so your challenges can be faced more readily. And so with all that said, I just want to thank to all the attendees who are still with us and make you aware of the upcoming sessions for the Climate Displacement Forum. So we have the 2 sessions here, and we hope you'll continue to join us for those. And finally, we want to invite you to a virtual discussion on our online platforms. And like we said, if you have some unanswered questions from today's panel, we'll reach out to the panelists and get their answers in written form. So obviously, we may have lost Sophia and Walter from the line, but we're really glad we still got to hear them present, and we'll continue to reach out and get more details later on. So thank you again to everyone, and I hope that you all have a great rest of the day on behalf of EcoAdapt. So thanks for joining.